Okay, hello chess players. Today we're going to be going over the Sicilian after e4, c5, after knight f3, d6, d4. We're going to be taking a look at the open Sicilian, beginning with cd4, knight d4, and after knight f6, knight c3, we're going to be taking a look at the classical, and more specifically, this video is going to focus on the Rauzer variation, beginning with this move, bishop to g5. Anyways, if you like content like this and want to see more of it, please hit that subscribe button and click on that notification icon. So even if you're a primary Sozin player, you might want to include bishop g5 in your repertoire just to play against the classical. One of the reasons for that is against the classical, when you play bishop c4, you do have to deal with this possibility of queen to b6. And it's a little bit of an annoying move because you might not get the exact kind of position that you want with the white pieces. Now, if you are a primary Sozin player and you do want to just play chess like this, the current theory just says that after knight to b3, e6, bishop f4, white should have some sort of slight advantage. This goes all the way back to Kasparov versus Anand, played back in Linares back in 1994. That game continued knight to e5, bishop e2, bishop e7, bishop e3, queen c7, f4. And this should be slight edge white. So there's nothing wrong with that. But again, this might not be the type of position that you were looking for when you played your Fischer-Sozin with bishop to c4. So specifically against the classical, you might want to include a Rauzer attack with bishop g5. When you play a move like bishop g5, you're making an immediate threat. You're threatening to capture that knight on f6. And because of this, there's not a whole lot of moves in this position that are all that great for black that you have to worry about. If black does just some random move, you're going to play bishop f6, and that d5 square is going to become incredibly weak. You're going to be able to either play knight d5, or at some point you're going to be able to play queen h5. Basically, when these pawns get doubled, that's not a great thing for black, and there's a bunch of safety moves that he has to make once those pawns get doubled, and he's just not set up to do it. And that's why almost every single top player, and really almost every single player, will play the move pawn to e6 to cover that d5 square. So after pawn to e6, we're going to have queen to d2, and here there's more than one move order that gets played here. We usually end up in the same spot, but there are multiple ways to get there. The main move order is just to play bishop e7, but of course it is also possible to play pawn to a6 here. Pawn to a6 follows Kasparov versus Kramnik, played back in 1999. That game continued castle's queenside, pawn to h6, bishop e3, bishop t7, and then f3. So this setup is known as the English attack setup. So once you get here, your plan should be pretty straightforward. You're planning on playing something like g4, h4, g5, g6, etc. The English attack setup is a setup that people play against almost every single Sicilian opening, including sometimes the classical variation, but it's very common also against the Najdorf variation. And we played against the opening that it was played against first was the Dragon variation, and it wasn't called the English attack there, it was called the Yugoslav. So they started playing it against everything else other than the Yugoslav, other than the Dragon, and that's where it gained its name. The English attack was this setup in the Sicilian, basically against everything. So once you play here, your plan is straightforward. Kasparov has a slight edge at this point with the white pieces. And he did go on to win that game, although it was a pretty exciting game, actually. Kramnik didn't let Kasparov play the normal plan. Kramnik did stop the normal plan, and the game was very interesting. But anyways, so you can play this English attack setup. This is slight edge white. So going back, after queen d2, the main line is bishop to e7. And then here we have castle's queenside. And now there are a couple of moves here as well, but we're just going to follow the main move, which is castle's kingside, because I'm just trying to get to this very critical position beginning right here. Here, white has a number of options. White has f3, trying to play that normal sort of English attack setup with white. This is totally reasonable, and you're just going to have that normal English attack sort of plan with the white pieces, and this is a completely reasonable way to play. Another way you can play this is you can play h4, and another way you can play this is you can play f4. Now, h4 and f4 can transpose into each other. They can follow this game that was played between Anand and Garry Kasparov that was played in Paris back in 1995. So they can actually transpose into each other. You can start with f4 or you can start with h4. But there is actually a little bit of independent value between the two moves. And you can also play pawn to h4 with sort of the idea of playing an English attack setup. And it makes me kind of want to show this other game here that happened after knight takes d4, queen takes d4, and then we had this game continue bishop to d7, and then we have f3, playing this English attack setup with the white pieces, where you've thrown in pawn to h4 to sort of secure your bishop. The game that I'm following here is a pretty interesting one. This is actually Grischuk versus Jobava. played in Russia back in 2009. And the main reason I'm following this game is not because of the game itself, which continued with bishop to c6, king to b1, queen to a5, queen to d2, all of which is totally reasonable, and then rook fd8. In this position, Grischuk played the move bishop to d3, and he ended up with a slight edge, and he ended up going on to win. But what fascinates me about this game is the computer just spits out this absolutely amazing move here. It spits out this move knight to d5, which, I mean, it's not like a crazy tactic or anything. It's pretty straightforward that the queen has to be exchanged. We're going to pick up that bishop on e7. But then the king's going to sidestep with like king f8 and get the knight back. So when I first looked at this, I didn't think it was a big deal. But it turns out it is. Like after queen d2, rook d2, after queen d2 and then knight takes d7, king f8, and then knight g6 check, hg6, rook d2, you would think that white's advantage would be minimal at best. But as it turns out, the engine thinks that white has a decisive advantage here, and it took me a long time to figure out why. Basically, white has two potential passed pawns. He has a 3-on-2 on the queen side, and after he exchanges on f6, like bishop f6, gf6, he has a 2-on-1 over here as well. He's going to play g4, h5, h6, etc. He's going to create a passed pawn over here. And none of this would matter, like the 3-on-2 and this potential 2-on-1 wouldn't matter, except for the fact that after the dark squared bishop on e7 disappears, d6 is a permanent weakness. So this is something that can happen in the English attack setup that a lot of people aren't aware of, is you can actually play these positions for endgames, and you can play these positions for permanent pressure on d6. So basically just keeping the pawn structure stable without the idea of just the normal kind of pawn storm attack that people play in the English attack setup. So I gave a little bit of computer analysis here just to give you an idea. So for example, rook ac8, bishop e2, we would pile up on that d-pawn, make black defend, and then after black defends, we would start advancing our queen side a little bit. So say b3, b5, king b2, king e7, c4 takes, and now of course we've established our 2-on-1 over here, but the 2-on-1 isn't as big of a deal as what's going on over here. So this is the idea, is after rook b8, we're going to play g4, and then say bishop b5, we'll just exchange, we'll kick this rook back to b7, and now this is the winning idea, and it is winning, is e5 takes, and then we exchange everything. They have to take back with the pawn, and now we just win. h5 is winning. That's it. We play h5 and we win. And so the computer was looking at these things, and it just saw that black was going to get tied down, and eventually white can force all the exchanges and win. And I don't know. That's why computers are just so much better than people. But it's really good to note that this idea with knight g5, this is something worth playing. And this is actually one of the reasons that I actually like the move order beginning with 1 to h4, is because I have this possibility to play for a win with h4 followed by f3. But anyways, going back into the main lines, which are going to be either h4 or f4, and like I said, they're a little interchangeable, but f4 does have some independent value. So we have f4, knight takes d4, queen takes d4, and now we're going to have h6, and this leads into our main lines. Now, in this Anand versus Garry Kasparov game played back in 1995, Anand continued with pawn to h4. Now, it is also possible to just play this position positionally, which is what Magnus Carlsen decided to do. He played bishop to h4. This is following Carlsen versus Radjabov. And then after queen a5, he continued with e5, d takes e5, queen takes e5, queen takes e5, d takes e5. And he does actually have a slight edge here. He didn't manage to win the game, but he actually had a lot of chances. So again, white has a slight edge because he's going to be able to exchange off that dark squared bishop, and he's going to have the 3-on-2 pawn majority on the queen side. And as previously established by the last example, these two things do actually matter, and you can actually play for a win just with those very small advantages in your position. But Carlsen didn't manage to win. Radjabov managed to hold on to a draw, but again, Carlsen did have a lot of chances to win in that game. So bishop to h4 is a totally reasonable way to play chess. But coming back to this exciting sacrifice, I mean, who doesn't want to play chess like this? I actually think on the club level, just playing like this, either with, beginning with f4 and then playing h4, or beginning with h4 and then playing f4, I think this is really reasonable, and I think you're going to win a lot of games. Gary Kasparov took the bishop, which is apparently the best move, or one of the best moves, and then Anand took back with h takes g5. So this is essentially White's strategy. White wants to play something like queen f2, queen h4, get his queen and rook piled up on the h-file, and then just play checkmate on h8. But all that being said, it's not too simple to do that. Black is going to play this move knight to g4, which actually covers all of the squares that the queen can go to get over there. So Anand first has to get rid of that knight. So bishop e2 is forced. We're going to have e5, and then Anand brings his queen very cleverly all the way back to g1, of course with the idea of exchanging on g4 and bringing that queen to the h2 square. So we're still following through with this plan. So the next couple moves are kind of forced. We have e takes f4, takes on g4, takes, queen h2 threatening mate, and of course f5 is absolutely 100% forced. We have to play this move. And then Anand correctly plays queen to h7, and then we have king f7, and now Anand makes a mistake, and actually both sides make mistakes. So according to the engine, the correct move is e captures f5, and I'll get back to that in a minute because this move was played after this game. Nobody actually managed to win with it, though. The engine says this move is +1. Nobody managed to win with it, and I'm going to get back to why, because it's not clear to me that black is actually worse. Like, I think the engine says +1, but the position may be unwinnable for white. So we'll get back to that in a minute. What Anand played was rook h6, which was actually a mistake. And according to the engine, black just has a decisive advantage after rook to g8. Kasparov did not play that. Kasparov played bishop takes g5. And this is apparently Anand's last chance to save the game after bishop to g5. He could have played queen to g6 check with the idea of perpetual check, and it's just a draw, and everybody goes home, and everything is fine. He did not do that. He played rook on h takes d6, and this allows Kasparov to find the winning move, pawn to f3 check, king to b1, and then this queen sacrifice, queen takes d6. Which apparently gives black a winning attack, because after rook takes d6, he's going to play f captures g2. The engine actually liked f2 a little bit better. But the idea is that the pawn on g2 is threatening to become a new queen, so you better have something really good here. So the game continued queen h2, bishop to f3, and then we had this queen g3. And now Kasparov apparently had an easy win with the move rook a to d8, which would have been decisive. He made the mistake of playing rook h8, which gives Anand one last chance to get some sort of perpetual, beginning with the move rook to d7 check, which apparently would have been completely equal. So instead of rook to d7 check, we had queen takes g5, and then we have rook h1 check, knight to d1, g1 equals queen, rook to d7 check, king f8, queen takes f5 check, king to g8, queen f3, rook f8, queen b3, king h7, and Anand resigned because it's clear that black has consolidated his material, and he has nothing left to play for with the white pieces, after black created a new queen and is now up in exchange. So all that being said, if we go back to this initial sacrifice, no problem with it. Queen h2 is fine. f5, queen h7 is fine. King here. You need to play e captures f5. So e captures f5, and the best move is going to undoubtedly be still bishop takes g5. And now, this is really critical. If you want to, you can take a draw. You can just play queen g6, king h7, queen h7, etc. And that's just a perpetual, and you can take that right here. If you want to play for a win, you have to play the move knight e4. This is the only move that plays for a win according to the engine. And again, according to the engine, this is +1. So what happens? We have knight e4. We're going to have the same idea as in the Anand Kasparov game. We're going to have f3 check. We're going to have king to b1. We're going to have f captures g2, queen g6 check, king g8. And again, we can take perpetual, queen h7, etc. But if you want to play for a win, knight takes g5 is correct. Now, this was actually played in one game. Knight takes g5. So here's the idea. After bishop takes f5, we're going to play queen back to h5. Takes equals queen. Rook takes. We're threatening mate on h8. Doesn't look like there's a way to stop it. There is one way to stop it. We can sacrifice the queen. We can play queen takes g5, queen takes g5. And according to the engine, this is major advantage white by 1 pawn. So Stockfish says this is +1 for white. I take a little bit of issue with this because, okay, it might be +1 like on paper. How do I break through with the white pieces? After something simple like rook f6, there is no way for me to break through this fortress. And this was played in Adi Amina versus Ivanov, played in Moscow back in 2020. They played this game for like 78 moves. It ended in a draw. White could not figure out how to break through. And I'll be completely honest, I would not be able to figure out how to break through either. I don't see an obvious way to break through. There's actually a bunch of scenarios where you can even exchange this rook for the bishop and the rook, and the rook can create a blockade against just the queen. So it's very difficult for me to understand how black doesn't have a completely blockading position here and how this position is not completely equal. So that being said, you've got your sort of two choices here. You can play these crazy positions with f4 and h4 and give up the piece, and that's reasonable, but you have to be willing to try to grind out that position where maybe black has a blockade and you can't break through, and you have to know your theory well enough to get there, so that you don't lose in the way that Anand lost to Garry Kasparov. But of course, it's also possible to play in two other ways, which is instead of playing h4, you can of course just retreat this bishop with bishop h4, and you can try to play the endgame the way that Carlsen played it against Rajabov. That's also very reasonable. And you can also try to play some sort of English attack setup, and you can begin it with either pawn to f3, or my personal preference is even to just begin it with pawn to h4. And I just love this possibility of, after, say, knight takes d4, knight takes d4, bishop d7, we play this English attack setup, and this amazing idea of knight d5 with a completely winning endgame is just available for you to try. And again, this was completely missed in Grishchuk versus Jobava, played back in 2009. So anyways, I hope you found this video helpful. I hope you can use some of these ideas in your own games. And I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe. Thank you very much for watching.